Knowing about the Anunnaki changes everything. It's not just another theory, it's a rupture. A violent crack in the wall of everything you thought was solid. History, religion, purpose, identity, spirituality. When this knowledge reaches you, really reaches you, it doesn't give you answers. It leaves you reeling in questions. And for many of us, it hurts. Because the story we were given, the one we trusted, the one passed down through families, temples, schools, wasn't the full story, maybe not even close. This video isn't just information, it's confession, it's excavation. I'm going to take you through what I've discovered, what I've questioned, what I've felt. And I won't pretend it's easy because it wasn't for me. But if you're here, maybe you've already started to feel it too. That unsettling sense that there's more. That something vast, ancient, and deliberately hidden has been echoing through our myths, our blood, our dreams. By the end, you may not believe what I believe, but you'll never look at human history the same way again. When I first began questioning the official version of our past, I wasn't looking for controversy. Like most, I had absorbed the timeline taught in schools. A linear evolution from primitive hunter-gatherers to modern civilization, driven by agriculture, metallurgy, and gradual social organization. But then, I stumbled upon something that didn't fit, and once you see the cracks, the whole structure starts to wobble. Why is it that some of the most sophisticated architecture on Earth predates the invention of the wheel? Why are there cities submerged beneath the ocean that shouldn't even exist according to conventional timelines? And more importantly, why are these discoveries either ignored, dismissed, or buried? Let's begin with Göbekli Tepe, a site that should not exist. Dated to around 9,600 BCE, this ancient complex in southeastern Turkey features massive T-shaped pillars weighing up to 20 tons, many of them intricately carved with animal symbols. Mainstream historians argue that agriculture began around 8,000 BCE. But if Göbekli Tepe predates farming, then who built it? And why did someone intentionally bury it? This is not just a historical curiosity. It's a direct contradiction of everything we've been told about the birth of civilization. And yet, despite the implications, the site is treated like an outlier, an anomaly. I don't believe it is. I believe Göbekli Tepe is a remnant, a surviving fragment of a lost civilization far more advanced than we are allowed to consider. Mainstream archaeology operates within a framework that resists radical reinterpretation. Religious institutions, likewise, have long suppressed alternative readings of sacred texts that might threaten their dogma. Consider the Library of Nineveh. Buried beneath modern-day Iraq, it housed thousands of clay tablets, including the Enuma Elish and the Epic of Gilgamesh, that contain accounts of sky beings, creation myths, and even a flood narrative predating the Bible. The term Elohim, used repeatedly in the Old Testament, is plural, but when translated into modern Bibles, it becomes God, singular. This isn't just a linguistic oversight, it's a deliberate alteration, concealing the original polytheistic worldview of early Hebrew texts. The word kavod, traditionally interpreted as glory, may in context describe a radiant, fiery craft, something tangible, not metaphorical. Personally, I believe many of these terms encode forgotten encounters with beings not of this earth. This brings me to what I call the forbidden archaeology. At Baalbek in Lebanon, we find stones weighing over 800 tons, perfectly cut, aligned, and stacked. No Bronze Age culture should have been able to move these, let alone place them with such surgical precision. Similar mysteries abound in Giza, Pumapunku, and Teotihuacan, sites across the world, supposedly built independently, yet sharing astonishing similarities in alignment, design, and scale. How do you explain ancient maps like the Peary Race Chart from 1513, which depicts the coastline of Antarctica free of ice? Modern sonar only confirmed that shape in the 20th century. Who had this knowledge and when? Again and again, the evidence points not to primitive trial and error, but to lost technologies. I see in these structures the fingerprints of a civilization whose knowledge of astronomy, geometry, and energy far exceeded what we credit to ancient humans. The question then arises, where did they get it? All over the world, there are myths of beings descending from the sky. In Sumerian texts, they are called the Anunnaki, those who from heaven to earth came. These beings are not described as spirits or ideas. They are tangible, powerful, and present. They arrive with purpose, establish cities like Eridu and Nippur, and bring knowledge with them. India speaks of flying crafts, Vimanas, and gods like Shiva and Vishnu descending from other lokas or realms. In Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl is a feathered serpent who brings civilization from the stars. In Egypt, gods arrive by skyboats, bearing tools and wisdom. Even the apocryphal Book of Enoch describes watchers descending from the heavens and taking human wives. To me, this doesn't look like mythology. It looks like memory. A memory encoded in allegory, distorted by time, but rooted in real encounters. We must also look underground, literally. Beneath the Great Pyramid are shafts yet unexplored. The Serapeum of Saqqara houses massive granite boxes, perfectly carved and hidden deep beneath the earth. Why would ancient people go to such lengths to construct hidden chambers in solid rock? Were these tombs or something else? In many traditions, underground realms are guarded by beings, serpent entities, gods of the underworld, or hybrid guardians. In India, the Nagas are said to dwell beneath sacred temples, protecting lost knowledge. The recurring theme of hidden chambers, sealed tunnels, and forbidden knowledge echoes a global belief in places intentionally closed off, possibly to preserve technologies, possibly to contain them. What ties all of this together are the myths, or what we've been taught to call myths. Across civilizations with no known contact, we find stories of sky beings mating with humans, serpents as keepers of forbidden wisdom, divine wars, great floods, and cycles of destruction and rebirth. The stepped pyramids of Mesoamerica resemble those of Mesopotamia. Sacred numbers 3, 7, 12, 360 appear in religious texts, calendars, and architectural proportions. Flood myths appear in the Atrahasis, Genesis, and the Mahabharata. The number of divine beings varies, but their roles remain strikingly similar. Creators, judges, rebels, teachers. This is not coincidence. This is convergence. The convergence of memory across thousands of years and thousands of miles. The point is that mythology is usually seen as a rudimentary and primitive language, prior to logos or logic. In philosophy, it is even said that before logos or the word, there existed mythos. This is, according to several authors, the beginning of philosophy, marking the transition from mythical thought to rational and logical thought. For me, the forbidden past isn't just about old buildings or missing tools. It's about the erasure of a deeper truth. that humanity has been shaped by forces beyond this planet, and that these forces once walked among us. But awakening to this reality isn't a single moment. It's a process, a gradual erosion of what we've been taught to believe. It means confronting cognitive dissonance. It means questioning the scholars and theologians who told us that mythology is fiction and that divinity is intangible. What if our ancestors encoded real cosmic knowledge into their stories, their architecture, and their rituals? What if the sacred was scientific, not metaphorical, but vibrational, energetic, dimensional? To me, the myths were never meant to be read as fiction. They were meant to be remembered. And once you begin to remember, you can never go back. This is the journey I have chosen. Not to believe blindly, but to question endlessly. And in the ruins of lost cities, in the stories of sky gods, and in the silence beneath buried temples, I find not just echoes of a forgotten world, but the blueprint of a truth long buried, and now beginning to rise.
My name is Lucas, and I'm the man, the mind, the heart, and the soul behind those videos. I am a Brazilian who have been studying this topic for more than a decade. I have started here on YouTube on 2022 on my native language, which is Portuguese, and I have started this project, this channel here in 2023. And what I want really tell you here is that this is not a kind of AI channel that have been appearing on YouTube, reading some aleatory stuff about the Anunnaki or ancient civilizations. I really love this topic. I really been studying this for a long time, and I am putting not just my rationality on those videos, but also my soul on those videos. So I just want to tell you that there is a human being here reading those scripts, and sometimes it is me editing the videos, and other times are other people that have been working with me on those editing. But I just want you to know that there is a real human being here, and a human that likes to study those topics and likes to think and question about all this a lot.
When I first began to see ancient myth not as metaphor but as memory, everything changed. The poetic descriptions of divine beings descending from the sky no longer felt like religious imagination. They read like historical reports of encounters, of arrivals. Every culture on Earth speaks of gods who came from above, from the heavens, the stars, or another realm altogether. Mainstream academia interprets these stories as symbolic projections of early human fears and aspirations. But to me, that explanation no longer suffices. The consistency is too great, the detail too precise, and the impact on civilization too profound. In ancient Sumer, the earliest known civilization, the gods were called the Anunnaki, literally, those who from heaven to earth came. They didn't appear in dreams or visions. They landed. They walked. They built. Enki, Enlil, and others are described not as abstractions, but as beings with agendas, rivalries, and extraordinary capabilities. They established cities like Eridu and Nippur, the very foundations of organized human life. In India, the stories are even more explicit. The Mahabharata and Ramayana tell of gods arriving from other realms, Vishnu Loka, Shiva Loka, descending in Vimanas. These were not glowing clouds or flying carpets. They were aerial vehicles with specifications, engines powered by mercury, structures of metal, instructions for flight. They could rise vertically, hover, travel vast distances, and unleash devastating weapons. The texts describe wars in the sky, cities floating above mountains, and palaces that could vanish or reappear at will. If this were fiction, it would be astonishingly imaginative, but it aligns with too many other records across the globe to dismiss as mere fantasy. The Egyptians believed their gods arrived in celestial boats. Temples were aligned not just with solar or lunar cycles, but with star systems: Orion, Sirius, and the Pleiades. In the pyramid texts, there are references to the pharaoh's soul traveling to the stars, not as metaphorical ascent, but as a return to the place of the gods. Star maps were carved into stone, celestial knowledge encoded in sacred geometry. This was not the astronomy of primitive stargazers. It was the architecture of cosmic precision. Mesoamerican legends speak of Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, who arrived from the sea or from the sky. In some accounts, he came in a shining vessel. In others, as a radiant being with knowledge and power. He was teacher, civilizer, lawgiver. He promised to return. Why is it that across continents separated by oceans and millennia, these cultures all describe the same pattern? Beings descending in light, serpents and stars, skycraft and sacred architecture. This raises a question mainstream academia avoids. Were these gods really divine, or were they something else? In Genesis 18, Abraham is visited by 3 men who are described as divine. They speak, walk, and most importantly, they eat. They consume food, deliver messages, and depart. This is not how spirits behave. These are beings of flesh, of presence. Yahweh himself, often equated with the singular God, is described as riding on clouds, descending in fire, and appearing in smoke. He rests. He becomes angry. He demands food offerings with very specific instructions. This is not abstract theology. It is interaction. Material, physical, and repeatable. If we remove the filter of monotheistic reinterpretation, what emerges is a world teeming with powerful, sentient, and visible entities. Entities capable of manipulating matter, energy, and perhaps time. The Indian Vimanas offer a key to this mystery. The Samarangana Sutradhara, a 10th century Sanskrit text, describes aerial vehicles with designs resembling modern spacecraft. The propulsion mechanisms involve heat, vibration, and mercury, components that eerily echo early theories of anti-gravitational drive. These machines were not simply symbolic representations of the divine. They had blueprints. They had function. Vimanas were said to be housed in mountain cities or flown between celestial realms. Some carried multiple passengers. Others could cloak themselves or emit blinding light. And many were used in battles between gods. But not all sky beings were benevolent. Across the ancient world, we encounter another motif, that of reptilian or serpent entities. In India and Southeast Asia, they are the Nagas and Sarpas, shape-shifting beings who dwell in underground cities, possess deep esoteric knowledge, and sometimes interfere with human affairs. The Hebrew Bible's serpent in Eden, the Nachash, is not a simple snake. The original Hebrew suggests a shining, intelligent being. It speaks, it reasons, it defies Yahweh, and it brings forbidden knowledge. Were these serpent beings another faction of the sky visitors? Some traditions suggest so. In some cases, they mated with humans, producing hybrid lineages. In others, they served as guardians of sacred sites, or deceivers who sought to alter humanity's path. These beings, whether Anunnaki or Nagas, Elohim or Quetzalcoatl, all share one trait. They do not originate here. They come from above, not necessarily in altitude, but in realm. Some may have come from the stars, others from parallel dimensions. Ancient cosmologies often describe layered realities. Lokas in Hinduism, heavens and firmaments in Mesopotamia and Israel. These were not metaphorical realms. They were physical domains, accessible under certain conditions, technological, vibrational, or spiritual. The ziggurats of Mesopotamia and the pyramids of Egypt may have been more than tombs or temples. They were gateways, not symbolic ascents to the divine, but literal platforms, perhaps even launch pads, built to connect Earth to the heavens. This redefines how we view the word heaven. It was never purely spiritual. In many ancient traditions, heaven was a location, up there, but reachable, not by prayer, but by travel. This brings us to a crucial realization. What we now describe as UFO phenomena, alien encounters, or dimensional visitations, these are not new. They are ancient. The same descriptions appear in the scrolls of Ezekiel, in the visions of Vedic rishis, in the oral traditions of shamans. Bright lights, vibration, time loss, messages, transformation. To the ancient mind, these events were divine. To us, they are anomalous, but the pattern remains unchanged. Personally, I believe these gods were visitors, interdimensional or interplanetary, whose technology appeared magical, and whose presence shaped the course of human evolution. They arrived in ships. They spoke in thunder. They walked among kings. They built civilizations. And then, in many cases, they left. But their memory did not fade. It became myth. It became religion. It became the foundation of our history and the mystery of our future. To me, the gods of old were not figments of imagination. They were real, and the story of their arrival is not over. It is still unfolding. There is a moment in the study of ancient texts when the language stops sounding symbolic and starts sounding technical. When creation myths stop reading like poetry and begin to resemble procedures. That moment is unavoidable when we examine how the ancients described the origin of humanity itself. Mainstream scholarship frames these stories as metaphorical attempts to explain human existence. I understand that position, but the deeper I go into the source material, the harder it becomes to accept symbolism as the full explanation. What these texts describe looks less like divine magic and more like deliberate design. In the Sumerian world, humanity was not created out of love, nor as a philosophical exercise. It was created out of necessity. The Atrahasis text tells us plainly that the gods were working the earth themselves, digging canals, maintaining the land, extracting resources. Over time, this labor became unbearable. A group of lesser gods, the Igigi, rebelled. Faced with unrest, the higher gods chose a solution that would permanently alter the course of this planet. They would manufacture a new being to work in their place. This is not my interpretation. This is what the text records. Enki, the god of wisdom and engineering, works alongside Ninhursag, a goddess associated with birth and life sciences. Together, they carry out a creation process involving clay and the blood of a slain divine being. The language is strikingly specific. Blood is mixed. Essence is transferred. Wombs are prepared. The process fails more than once, requiring adjustment. Historians often say this is symbolic. Alternative researchers suggest it reflects early attempts at genetic engineering. Personally, I believe the second interpretation aligns far better with the precision of the account. Myth does not need trial and error. Engineering does. The result of this process is humanity, created not as equals, but as a labor force. The texts emphasize obedience, function, productivity. Humans are described as designed to serve the gods, to relieve them of physical toil. This theme appears again and again, not just in Sumer, but in later traditions that inherited and reshaped these narratives. In the Book of Genesis, creation is framed differently, but key elements remain. Humanity is formed from the dust of the earth. Life is imparted through a divine act. The word used, Adam, does not name a specific individual. It means the man, or more broadly, mankind. This is crucial. Adam is not initially presented as a person with a biography. Adam is a category, a model, a prototype. This raises a question mainstream theology avoids. Was Adam the first human or the first successful version? Genesis itself hints at something earlier. After Adam and Eve leave Eden, they encounter other people. Cities already exist. Lineages continue beyond the garden. These inconsistencies dissolve when we consider Adam not as the first human, but as a genetically modified one. The Garden of Eden in this reading becomes something very different. Not a paradise lost, but a controlled environment, a testing ground, a restricted zone where knowledge, symbolized by the tree, is regulated. Access is denied not out of moral failure, but because the subjects were no longer compliant. When we move forward to Genesis 6, the narrative becomes even more explicit. The sons of God, or the Beni Elohim, descend to earth and mate with human women. Their offspring are the Nephilim, described as mighty beings, heroes of old, men of renown. These are not ghosts. They have bodies. They fight wars. They dominate societies. The Book of Enoch expands this account dramatically. 200 watchers descend, led by figures who swear an oath to interfere with humanity. They teach metallurgy, weapon making, astronomy, medicine, and enchantments. They take wives. They produce offspring of immense size and strength. These hybrids consume resources at unsustainable levels. Violence escalates. The earth becomes corrupted. According to the text, this is not a moral allegory. It is a crisis of containment. The flood that follows reads less like divine punishment and more like a planetary reset, a purge of unstable genetic outcomes, a rollback of unauthorized intervention. Mainstream scholars argue this is myth layered onto myth. I see something else, a record of experimentation that went too far. And this pattern is not isolated to the Near East. In Greek mythology, the gods routinely produce children with humans: Heracles, Perseus, Achilles. Each possesses enhanced strength, resilience, or perception. They are consistently portrayed as superior hybrids, often placed in leadership or warrior roles. In Egypt, gods like Horus and Anubis display mixed human-animal characteristics. These are usually interpreted symbolically, but when viewed alongside other hybrid traditions, another possibility emerges. These forms may encode memory of cross-species experimentation or genetic symbolism tied to function and hierarchy. In the Americas, origin myths speak of star ancestors and semi-divine founders. The Inca claimed descent from beings who emerged fully formed, possessing knowledge and authority. Polynesian genealogies trace royal bloodlines to sky beings. Across cultures, elites consistently claim non-human ancestry. This is not coincidence, it is pattern. The Enuma Elish reinforces this framework. Humanity is created from the blood of a defeated god, not metaphorically, literally. Divine substance is transferred into a new form. The text emphasizes ownership. Humans are the property of their creators. Repeatedly, the formula is the same. Earth material plus divine essence equals man. To me, this does not look like mythology. It looks like memory. Ancient rituals further support this interpretation. Blood sacrifices are central across civilizations. Lineage purity becomes sacred. Kingship is tied to divine descent. Seed and blood are treated as powerful, dangerous substances. These obsessions make sense in a world where genetics determines status. The Book of Enoch even records the Watchers teaching humans how to alter plants, animals, and bodies. This is not vague mysticism. It is applied knowledge, forbidden knowledge, precisely because it mirrors the methods of the gods themselves. Some Gnostic texts go further, describing creation as an act of rebellion. Divine beings operating outside an original cosmic order, fashioning humanity without authorization. This suggests not a single unified group of creators, but competing factions with different agendas. And then there are the underground spaces. Across India, Tibet, and Mesoamerica, legends persist of subterranean chambers associated with birth, transformation, and guarded knowledge. Serpent beings protect these spaces. Entry is restricted. Initiation is required. In Sumer, this realm is called the Abzu, the subterranean domain of Enki, associated with creation and life sciences. In Eastern traditions, similar places are described as crystal caves or inner earth sanctuaries. Mainstream archaeology calls these symbolic underworlds. I'm not convinced. These descriptions align disturbingly well with what we would today call laboratories, gene vaults, or controlled environments. Places where creation occurs away from observation, where guardians ensure isolation. The serpent symbolism appears again here, not as evil, but as knowledge keeper. DNA itself coils like a serpent. Memory is encoded. Evolution is guided. When I step back and examine all of this together, the creation texts, the hybrids, the rituals, the underground chambers, a coherent picture emerges. Humanity was not an accident. We were designed, refined, altered, not once but repeatedly. Our intelligence, our creativity, our self-awareness, these may be the result of interventions layered over deep time. And our myths, far from being childish stories, may be the only surviving record of that process. The question is no longer whether ancient peoples believed the gods created them. The real question is why those gods went to such extraordinary lengths to do so, and what exactly they were trying to create. When we picture gods, most of us imagine serene, enlightened beings, aloof and eternal, watching from a distance. But the ancient texts tell a different story. They speak not of peace, but of conflict, not of unity, but of war. From Sumer to the Vedas, from the Bible to the Andes, the gods were not a single harmonious pantheon. They were factions, divided, territorial, and often at odds. And at the center of their disputes, Earth and us. In the Sumerian narratives, two divine forces emerge with clashing ideologies, Enlil and Enki. Enlil, the authority figure, a bringer of order, is often described as cold, harsh, and quick to judge. Enki, by contrast, is the scientist, the craftsman, the one who empathizes with humanity. When Enlil seeks to flood the world to eliminate a human population deemed unruly, it is Enki who warns a human survivor. These aren't just symbolic archetypes. They represent real divisions, real rivalries among beings whose influence shaped entire civilizations. To mainstream historians, this may be interpreted as mythological storytelling. But to me, it mirrors something more familiar: political fracture, rebellion, and war, only on a scale far beyond human comprehension. This isn't isolated to Mesopotamia. The Indian epics bring us to the very heart of celestial warfare. In the Mahabharata, we find weapons described in unsettlingly modern terms. The Brahmastra, for instance, is said to unleash a fire that consumes everything, capable of evaporating entire armies, poisoning the land, and causing months of black rain. The text describes cities flattened, trees burned without being touched by flame, and warriors blinded by white light. It sounds like myth until you compare it to the after effects of a nuclear blast. Radiation, contaminated rain, shadows burned into stone. This isn't imagination. It's memory encoded in poetry. And then there's Mohenjo-Daro. One of the oldest cities ever excavated, it offers a haunting archaeological mystery. Dozens of skeletons lie face down in the streets, unburied and unburned, as if something instant and catastrophic struck. Nearby, vitrified stone, melted into glass, appears without explanation. Soil samples reveal radiation levels inexplicable by ancient technology. Mainstream archaeology has no answer, but the evidence is there, embedded in the earth itself. This was not nature's doing. This was war. The Bible too carries echoes of these battles. The destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah is usually framed as moral allegory, but the language used, fire and brimstone from the sky, feels more military than metaphorical. The cities are leveled, their locations still bearing signs of geological scarring and sulfuric residues. Later, in the apocalyptic visions of Revelation, the sky splits. Armies of heaven descend. Stars fall to earth. The divine realm does not sit passively above us. It invades, conquers, and destroys. Yahweh, often portrayed as a singular god of love in later doctrine, is described as a warrior, leading celestial legions. To me, this is not spiritual abstraction, it is ancient disclosure. And humanity? We weren't bystanders, we were participants. In these wars among gods, humans were often soldiers, expendable, manipulable, and loyal to their creators. In the Mahabharata, charioteers like Krishna advise human kings, guiding them through battles that are, in essence, divine quarrels executed through mortal hands. In the Book of Enoch, the Watchers fall not just because they lust after human women, but because they overstep. They arm humanity with knowledge, weaponry, astrology, cosmetics, even sorcery. The implication is clear. They altered the course of human development for their own agendas. Some of these gods were punished, others disappeared. But the effects remained. The Babylonian Enuma Elish reveals a violent succession myth. Marduk rises by slaying Tiamat, a primordial force, and uses her body to craft the heavens. It's a divine coup, a reshaping of cosmic order through violence. Later interpretations morph these tales into Luciferian rebellions, wars in heaven, fallen angels cast down. Across every version, the pattern remains: betrayal, hierarchy collapse, and a restructuring of power. In ancient Egypt, in Sumer, in early dynasties of China and Mesoamerica, we find the same theme: god kings who ruled not symbolically, but as real, physical sovereigns. They had knowledge beyond their time. They lived far longer than ordinary humans. They were said to descend from the stars and ascend upon death. These kings weren't simply inspired by the gods. They were the gods, or their direct hybrids, commanders, governors, officers in a vast cosmic infrastructure that once operated openly on this planet. In their service, incredible machines are hinted at: winged discs, wheels within wheels, fiery chariots, and floating palaces. Ezekiel's vision is often dismissed as metaphor, but anyone familiar with modern propulsion systems cannot ignore the precision of his description. The Vedic Tripura, flying cities destroyed by targeted beams, mirrors not only modern aerial combat, but strategic orbital strikes. These were not symbols of faith. They were machines of war. The question then arises, where were these wars fought? Not just on Earth. Traditions from the Gnostics to the Vedas speak of battles waged across time and dimension. Eons, locus, realms layered within and beyond our physical world. Some conflicts, they say, happen not just across planets but across realities. Were these wars echoes of rival timelines, competing experiments, battles to control the evolutionary trajectory of entire species? If so, the weapons used would not only be physical, they'd be energetic. This brings us to sacred geometry. Ancient architecture, temples, ziggurats, pyramids, follows precise patterns. The golden ratio, the flower of life, phi spirals. These aren't decorative, they're functional. Some researchers propose that these structures formed a global energy grid, aligned to celestial bodies, capable of resonance, vibration, and possibly transmission. Vedic texts even describe weapons activated through mantra, sound, and intent, suggesting technology that responds to consciousness itself. Could these networks have once been used to defend against hostile entities? Or worse, to control populations across continents? We may never know the full scale of the divine wars, but the ruins remain, the myths endure, and the scars on our planet, vitrified cities, radioactive sands, and disrupted timelines, tell us something unspeakable happened. A long time ago, gods went to war, and we, humanity, were caught in the crossfire. I used to believe that ancient temples were simply places of worship, monuments of devotion shaped by the hands of primitive civilizations. But the deeper I looked, the more I found signs that these structures may have served functions far beyond religious ritual. From the towering pyramids of Egypt to the stepped ziggurats of Mesopotamia, from the Navapashana-crowned spires of Indian temples, to the buried ruins revealed by LiDAR across the Americas, the evidence began to converge into a different picture, one that challenges everything we think we know about ancient architecture. Mainstream historians insist these were ceremonial spaces, tombs, or centers of cultural gathering. But to me, this doesn't look like mythology. It looks like memory. Memory of a time when humanity interacted with forces capable of engineering energy systems, manipulating vibration, and accessing dimensions we can barely comprehend. Let's begin with the pyramids and ziggurats. These monumental forms appear independently across the globe, and yet they share striking characteristics: precise geometry, celestial alignment, and the use of massive stone blocks placed with such accuracy that modern engineers still struggle to explain how they were cut, moved, and fitted. Egyptologists claim the Great Pyramid was a tomb, yet no mummy has ever been found inside. What we do find are shafts, chambers, and a level of acoustic resonance so exact that it suggests these structures were designed to manipulate energy, not entomb the dead. Ancient Sumerian texts describe ziggurats as linking places between heaven and earth. That phrase has always haunted me. It implies more than symbolic connection. What if these were literal launch pads, communication hubs, designed to interface with the sky or something beyond it? In several depictions, the apex or capstone of these structures is missing. Some researchers propose these elements were once conductive, metallic or crystalline, allowing energy to flow through the structure like an antenna or transmitter. Could these have been power generators, Stargate anchors? The evidence doesn't rule it out. In India, we find another clue. Many temples are crowned with crystal lingams or Navapashana stones, believed to be conduits for divine energy. Mainstream interpretations say these are spiritual symbols, but when you realize that these crystals are often placed at the highest point of the temple, precisely where radio engineers would place an antenna, the comparison becomes unavoidable. In Tibetan stupas, a similar idea exists. The jewel at the peak acts as an energetic receiver. Were ancient builders trying to tune into something? What makes this even more compelling is how these structures consistently point to the stars. The pyramids of Giza align with Orion's belt. Other temples across the world aim toward Sirius or the Pleiades. In ancient Mesoamerican and Polynesian traditions, these same constellations are said to be the homes of the gods. This repetition is not artistic coincidence. These alignments suggest a form of celestial coordination, perhaps even communication. If you're arriving from another world or navigating dimensional gateways, wouldn't you need fixed star alignments, like cosmic GPS beacons? And we're only beginning to uncover how vast these structures really are. With LiDAR scanning, researchers have exposed buried pyramids and vast temple complexes under jungles and sands in Cambodia, the Amazon, and even Egypt. Some show layouts matching constellations. Others suggest harmonic ratios embedded into the very ground plans. These are not random piles of stone, they're blueprints, encoded technologies. Then there are the underground chambers. Beneath Malta, in Egypt, in Peru, beneath India's ancient shrines, we find subterranean rooms that seem deliberately constructed to respond to sound. Their acoustics are tuned to precise frequencies. Some chambers generate standing waves that induce altered states of consciousness. Were these early resonance chambers, healing rooms, or even consciousness-altering gateways? It might sound fantastical until you examine the healing properties attributed to these sites. Many temples were built with materials said to vibrate at specific frequencies. The Navapashana compounds used in some Hindu temples, for instance, are rumored to promote healing. Visitors report deep states of meditation, emotional release, even physical rejuvenation. Could this be the forgotten science of vibrational medicine encoded into architecture? The pattern is global. Across continents, without any known contact, civilizations built nearly identical structures. Step pyramids in Egypt, Mexico, China, circular enclosures in England and Peru, sacred ratios, such as the golden mean and the number 72, appear universally. How do we explain this architectural convergence? To me, the answer is simple: a shared origin. Whether through direct contact or genetic memory, these builders were working from a unified knowledge system, one that may have been given to them. Some myths make this explicit. In Sumer, Egypt, and India, the gods are said to have descended and constructed these temples themselves, or directed humans how to build them. At Teotihuacan, legends say the gods gathered to plan creation. At Angkor Wat, the layout resembles a circuit board. These aren't just religious sites, they look like control systems, possibly even landing grids. The ziggurats of Mesopotamia are described as places where divine chariots docked. What if that's literal? Modern archaeologists often dismiss these as symbolic. But when you examine the stonework of Baalbek, the seamless joints of Machu Picchu, or the interlocking blocks of Pumapunku, symbolism doesn't explain the precision. These stones were shaped with methods we can't replicate today, not without lasers or ultrasonic tools. Some legends speak of sound levitation or songs that made stones fly. I no longer think that's poetic exaggeration. And there's more. Ancient pilgrimage routes often follow ley lines, geomagnetic paths that connect sacred sites. Were these roads designed for more than spiritual journeying? Perhaps they were energetic circuits, nodes on a planetary grid. Pilgrims who walked them weren't just seeking enlightenment. They were realigning their own bodies to the Earth's resonance. Some reported visions, spontaneous healing, or contact with divine intelligences. To me, that sounds like technological initiation, not blind devotion. Even the shapes of these temples carry meaning. The spiral, the tower, the dome. These appear in myths and in blueprints across civilizations. In Hinduism, the vertical axis of the temple represents Mount Meru, the cosmic mountain that links all realms. In Norse mythology, it's Yggdrasil, the world tree. In Mesoamerica, it's the axis mundi. These aren't just metaphors. They point to vertical gateways, dimensional access points. Were these temples architectural representations of portals? I believe they were more than representations. I believe they were portals designed to activate consciousness, to bridge dimensions, and perhaps even to facilitate physical transition between realms. The gods weren't just honored here. They arrived here. They operated here. They maintained systems we have forgotten how to use. What we've inherited as temples may in fact be the broken remnants of a global energy network. A network that once spanned continents, connected the stars, healed the sick, and altered the minds of those who entered. We see ruins, but perhaps these are the scattered components of a machine, one not built to enslave us, but to awaken us. And the question that lingers is this: if our ancestors walked inside these structures and emerged transformed, what exactly were these temples built to do? I reached a point in this investigation where the idea of the Anunnaki as merely extraterrestrial no longer felt sufficient. Space alone does not explain what the ancient texts describe. Distance does not account for the distortions of time, the sudden appearances and disappearances, the impossible journeys completed without passage. Something else is at work here, something far more complex. Ancient traditions across the world repeatedly described beings who did not simply travel through space, but moved between realities. They crossed thresholds. They stepped in and out of time itself. Mainstream scholars often explain these accounts as mythological exaggerations or spiritual allegories. Alternative interpretations suggest advanced technology. Personally, I believe both views fall short unless we accept a third possibility, that these beings understood dimensions beyond our own and knew how to navigate them. One of the most overlooked clues is time. In multiple traditions, gods leave the human world and return to find centuries, even entire ages, have passed. In Sumerian narratives, certain gods vanish from the record for long stretches, only to reappear with humanity fundamentally changed. These gaps are rarely explained. Historians see them as narrative discontinuities. I see something else: time dilation. If these beings entered realms where time flowed differently, their absence would appear brief to them, yet vast to those left behind. Hindu cosmology preserves this idea with remarkable clarity. The return of Kalki, the future avatar of Vishnu, is not described as a resurrection or reincarnation in the human sense, but as a timed re-entry at the end of a cosmic cycle. Time itself is treated as layered, elastic, and navigable. The Book of Enoch offers another striking example. The Watchers descend at a specific moment in human history, interfere with humanity, and are later sealed away until a distant age. They are not killed. They are restrained in time, suspended, awaiting release. That concept only makes sense if time is not fixed. This understanding becomes clearer when we examine the ancient idea of multiple realms. Hindu cosmology describes 14 lokas, 7 higher realms and 7 lower ones, each governed by different laws of matter, consciousness, and duration. Humans exist in Burloka, but gods, semi-divine beings, and serpent entities occupy other planes. Travel between these realms is possible, but not ordinary. It requires alignment of consciousness, vibration, or technology. To mainstream historians, lokas are symbolic heavens and hells. But the texts describe them as structured environments with inhabitants, politics, and conflicts. Beings move between them, wars spill across them. Knowledge flows downward. This looks less like metaphor and more like a map of parallel realities. The Bible contains similar ideas, though often stripped of their original context. Jacob's ladder is described as a structure connecting heaven and earth, with beings ascending and descending continuously. This is usually explained as a dream, but the imagery is precise: a fixed point of connection, traffic moving between realms, a gateway anchored to a specific location. In Revelation, doors open in heaven. Beings emerge amid thunder, smoke, vibration, and light. These are not gentle spiritual metaphors. They are violent threshold events, exactly what one would expect from dimensional interference. Ancient Egypt spoke of the duat, not simply the afterlife, but a realm one had to pass through, navigate, and survive. Sumerian texts describe the Abzu as a cosmic deep, a domain beneath reality where creation and transition occur. These are not destinations for the dead alone. They are crossing zones. The repeated language of ascent and descent becomes impossible to ignore. Enoch does not die. He is taken. Elijah ascends in a fiery chariot. Jesus rises and vanishes. Mainstream theology treats these as miracles. I see them as transitions, shifts in state rather than location. Descent, in ancient language, often means densification, a lowering of vibration, a being entering material form. Ascent is the reverse, shedding density, increasing frequency, exiting the physical plane. These are not religious ideas. They are descriptions of physics expressed through myth. Teleportation appears repeatedly as well. Vedic texts describe gods appearing in multiple places at once or vanishing instantly. These abilities are labeled siddhis, supernatural powers. But the consistency of these reports suggests mechanism, not magic. Instantaneous movement implies non-linear travel, bypassing space altogether. Ezekiel's vision describes a craft that moves without turning, responding instantly to command. Wheels within wheels, a structure that defies inertia. This is not symbolic language. It is observational language written by someone struggling to describe unfamiliar technology. And then there are the Nagas. Across India, Tibet, and Southeast Asia, Nagas are described as serpent beings who dwell in subterranean realms, Patala Loka. They are not demons. They are custodians, guardians of knowledge, intermediaries between worlds. They appear, disappear, shift form, and punish or reward humans based on awareness. Mainstream interpretation reduces them to mythological symbols, but their behavior is consistent across cultures. They exist at the boundary between dimensions. They guard portals. They interact selectively. To me, they resemble entities adapted to exist in a different state of matter, able to phase between realities. Technology plays a central role in all of this. Vimanas do not simply fly. They defy gravity, inertia, and time. Divine weapons bend physical laws. Resurrection is described not as spiritual salvation, but as restoration of form. The Ark of the Covenant emits lethal energy, disrupts space, and cannot be touched directly. These are not fairy tales. They are reports of devices operating beyond human understanding. But something changed. Almost every tradition speaks of a fall, not merely a moral descent, but a rupture in consciousness, a perceptual severing. Humanity once moved freely through layers of reality, aware of its origin, its purpose, its multidimensional context. Then came the collapse. In Hindu cosmology, it is the descent into Kali Yuga, the darkest of the ages, where truth is fractured and time becomes linear. In Genesis, it is the fall from Eden, a loss of innocence, of direct communion, and of divine presence. In Gnostic tradition, it is the exile from the pleroma, the realm of perfect light and fullness. At the heart of the Gnostic myth lies Sophia, an emanation of the divine who, moved by a desire to create without her counterpart, births a flawed being, the demiurge. This being, blind and arrogant, crafts a false reality, a counterfeit cosmos governed by archons, lesser powers who trap divine sparks within flesh. Humanity, in this view, is not fallen by sin, but by misplacement. Divine essence imprisoned in a simulation of matter and time. The fall is not of behavior, but of context. We became locked into a single frequency band. Our perception collapsed inward. What once was a full-spectrum interface with existence became a narrow slit, a single channel broadcasting a world of separation, suffering, and amnesia. The soul forgot itself. The body became a prison, the mind a loop. And yet, remnants of the greater design survived. In initiation systems, alchemical rites, yogic disciplines, and Gnostic paths, maps were preserved, not metaphorically, but neurologically and energetically. These systems were built to restore access, to realign the inner architecture of the human being with the cosmic structure from which it fell. Consciousness, when tuned correctly, is the key, not merely to altered states, but to alternate realities. The Book of Enoch tells of the Watchers, beings who crossed boundaries, descending into denser planes and disrupting the laws of dimensional harmony. Their intervention fractured the veil further. In teaching humanity forbidden knowledge, they illuminated too much, too quickly. As punishment, they were bound, and with them, the gates closed for us as well. Access was restricted, the protocols were sealed. Still, the symbols endure. Spirals carved into megaliths, coiling serpents on temple walls, trees whose branches stretch to the heavens while roots sink into the abyss. These are not decorations, they are schematics, diagrams of dimensional ascent. The spiral is the path of energy as it rises through layers of being. The serpent is the kundalini, the inner divine force, dormant until awakened. The tree is the axis mundi, the world pillar, connecting the seen and the unseen. And the tower is not a building, but a metaphor for human consciousness seeking to breach its confinement. From this vantage point, the so-called gods are no longer just extraterrestrial visitors. They are dimensional navigators, engineers of timelines, shepherds of perception. They enter when conditions allow, when vibratory gates align. They leave when the frequencies collapse, and sometimes they interfere, shifting timelines, rebooting civilizations, rewriting memory. Floods, resets, erasures. Each myth from a different culture holds a shard of the same broken mirror. Stories that do not align because they were never linear. They are echoes, residual imprints of a multi-dimensional narrative. And the dissonance between them is not error, but evidence. We are seeing the same truth refracted through different dimensions. In this light, the Anunnaki are not merely ancient astronauts. They are archetypes of something far more complex. Dimensional technicians, bioenergetic architects, manipulators of soul codes and planetary frequencies. Their creations may not be just bodies, but timelines, realities, paths of evolution. And humanity? We are not the fallen by punishment. We are the forgotten by consequence. Lost children of a luminous origin, wandering in a world made by error, but seeded with keys for return. The question that remains is not whether higher dimensions exist. It's whether we were ever meant to forget them, or whether remembering them is the very reason we are here. What if one of the most widely read and revered texts in human history, rather than speaking only of faith and morality, was also an encoded record of contact with advanced beings. Beneath the religious teachings and symbolic stories of the Bible, there lies a trail of strange events, unusual descriptions, and inexplicable encounters that, when seen through a different lens, begin to resemble not divine mysteries, but technological realities. It begins with a word, Elohim. In Hebrew, Elohim is grammatically plural, yet in English translations it becomes simply God. But in Genesis, Elohim says, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness." This is not a solitary voice, it's a conversation, a counsel. And throughout early biblical texts, Elohim act in unison, decide in groups, and even intervene in human affairs collectively, particularly at moments of great consequence, such as the creation of humanity or the scattering at Babel. When viewed outside the religious framework, the Elohim resemble a race or faction, perhaps the very same Anunnaki spoken of in older Mesopotamian texts, operating with advanced authority over early civilization. One of the central figures in this narrative is Yahweh, often considered the singular, all-powerful God. But in Scripture, Yahweh behaves in curiously human ways. He walks in the Garden of Eden. He physically appears to Abraham and eats with him. He rests after creating the world. These are not attributes of a formless, omnipresent deity. They are markers of a physical presence, a being with needs, limits, and a body. Yahweh behaves more like an advanced humanoid than a transcendent spirit. And whenever Yahweh appears, the environment changes dramatically. At Mount Sinai, his descent is marked by thunder, lightning, thick smoke, fire, and earthquakes. The mountain itself trembles. The air vibrates. These aren't subtle metaphors. They resemble the aftershocks of a powerful technological event. The arrival of a craft, the ignition of an energy system, or the operation of a high-frequency device. The visual and auditory cues described, pillars of cloud, fire from the sky, trumpeting sounds, are uncannily similar to modern propulsion systems, sonic booms, and electromagnetic discharges. Then there is the Ark of the Covenant, perhaps the most enigmatic object in the entire Bible. Described as a gold-plated box with specific materials, dimensions, and regulations, the Ark isn't just a symbol. It behaves like a machine. Unauthorized contact results in death. It emits sound and light. It can bring victory in battle or level walls, as at Jericho. It is carried with extreme caution, shielded by curtains, and approached only by specific individuals wearing protective garments. These features align more with a radioactive or energy-based device than a ritual object. Some have speculated it was a power generator, a communication unit, or even a weapon, possibly of non-human origin. The fact that the stone tablets of the Ten Commandments, inscribed by the finger of God, were stored inside the Ark hints that these tablets might themselves be encoded data devices, not simple commandments, but keys or scripts containing information, energy, or frequencies. The Tower of Babel offers another revealing moment. The narrative describes humanity building a tower to reach heaven. While often considered metaphorical pride, the text implies an actual structure capable of accessing the heavens, possibly through advanced technology or energy manipulation. The Elohim's decision to intervene, confuse human language, and scatter people across the earth could be interpreted as an intentional suppression of a breakthrough, perhaps even the dismantling of a proto-civilization that had begun to rediscover the knowledge once granted to humanity. These patterns repeat across the Old Testament. Abraham entertains 3 men who later reveal divine awareness. They eat with him. They speak of Sarah's pregnancy. Their behavior blends advanced monitoring with personal engagement. This event bears resemblance to a controlled contact experience, non-human beings taking on familiar form to communicate with minimal disruption. And then there's Ezekiel, whose vision of a wheel within a wheel remains one of the most extraordinary passages in the Bible. He describes a flying object made of gleaming metal, surrounded by fire and lightning, moving in all directions without turning. Inside are beings like men, radiating light and power. Their platform lifts into the air, wheels rotating independently. The entire encounter reads like the description of a drone or spacecraft, interpreted by a man with no technological vocabulary. Today, Ezekiel's vision would be classified as a UFO encounter. Repetition of elemental markers, clouds, fire, thunder, trumpets, pillars of smoke, follows these beings wherever they go. Whether accompanying Yahweh, appearing to prophets, or surrounding holy places, these signatures resemble the operation of machines, not metaphors. High-frequency sound, plasma discharge, energy field manipulation. This lens opens new interpretations for the Bible's so-called miracles. Parting waters, perhaps controlled electromagnetic field manipulation, manna falling from the sky, nutrient dispersion from above, voices from heaven, holographic communication, instant healing or blinding lights, targeted energy bursts, or biotechnological interventions. The language used is poetic, yes, but the experiences described feel very real and eerily consistent with advanced tech witnessed by pre-scientific observers. Even the broader patterns of the Bible seem to follow cosmological cycles: creation, fall, purification, rebirth. These cycles are mirrored in other traditions, the Hindu Yugas, the Mayan Bhaktans, and even in Egyptian or Babylonian cosmologies. This raises the possibility that such texts preserve memories of periodic interventions, perhaps cosmic resets or timeline corrections administered by non-human intelligences. Ultimately, the Bible may be more than sacred scripture. It may be a historical interface, a record of interactions between early humanity and technologically advanced beings, interpreted through a spiritual worldview. Terms like glory, holiness, and spirit may not point only to inner sanctity, but to visible energy fields, electromagnetic presences, or interdimensional states. The angel of the Lord, who blinds soldiers, commands armies, or destroys cities in flashes of light, may not be a metaphor, but a literal entity wielding power beyond our comprehension. Spirituality, after all, might be our ancestors' way of describing science they could not yet explain. In reinterpreting these stories, the goal is not to strip the Bible of meaning. On the contrary, it is to restore its deeper reality, as a document that speaks not just of ethics and devotion, but of contact, technology, and the multi-dimensional history of humanity. This approach does not deny faith. It expands it, placing our oldest sacred stories into a much larger, much older, and perhaps far more astonishing context. Echoes of that contact still ripple through time, and maybe, if we look with new eyes, we can begin to hear them again. If there is one symbol that refuses to disappear from humanity's deepest memory, it is the serpent. It coils through our myths, our temples, our sacred texts, and even our biology. Mainstream theology reduces it to a villain, a tempter, a metaphor for evil. Mainstream archaeology calls it symbolism, archetype, psychological projection. But the global consistency of the serpent narrative suggests something else entirely. To me, this doesn't look like mythology. It looks like memory. The story begins in Eden, where the serpent is introduced not as a monster, but as a speaker. It reasons, it questions, it offers knowledge. Nowhere in the original text is it identified as Satan. That association comes much later. In Genesis, the serpent's crime is not deception, but interference, introducing humans to awareness before they were meant to have it. The fruit does not kill Adam and Eve, it awakens them. Their eyes are opened. They recognize themselves. They gain discernment. Mainstream theology interprets this as disobedience. Alternative researchers see it differently. Personally, I see Eden as a controlled environment, a managed habitat, and the serpent as a non-aligned intelligence that disrupted a carefully regulated human experiment. The punishment that follows is not moral correction, it is containment. Humanity is expelled, access is restricted, and knowledge becomes forbidden. That pattern does not stop in the Bible. Across India and Southeast Asia, serpent beings known as Nagas or Sarpas are described not as demons, but as ancient, powerful entities who dwell underground, guard knowledge, and interact with gods and humans alike. They are shapeshifters. They are long-lived. They possess wisdom beyond human reach. And most importantly, they are real beings in these traditions, not metaphors. Temples across India, Thailand, and Cambodia are wrapped in massive Naga sculptures. These are not hidden figures. They are honored, positioned at entrances, stairways, and thresholds. In some carvings, the transformation is explicit. A serpent body rising from below, gradually assuming a human form as it reaches the surface. This is not symbolic ambiguity. It is visual documentation of shape-shifting, the same ability attributed to serpent beings across cultures. Mainstream scholarship calls this mythological art. But why does the same motif appear in regions with no known contact? Why do serpent beings consistently occupy underground realms, guarding access points to sacred spaces? And why are they so often associated with forbidden knowledge? The answer may lie in genetics. Ancient royal bloodlines across the world claim descent from serpent or dragon beings. Egyptian pharaohs wore the uraeus cobra as a symbol of divine authority. Chinese emperors traced their lineage to celestial dragons. Indian Naga dynasties openly identified themselves as serpent-born. These claims were not poetic metaphors for power. They were genealogies. Bloodlines mattered. Seed mattered. To me, this suggests something far more literal: interbreeding, genetic influence, the preservation of non-human traits within human lineages, especially among rulers. This would explain why serpent beings are so often associated with kingship, guardianship, and control of sacred knowledge. They were not merely symbols of power, they were sources of it. Serpent beings are almost always positioned as guardians. They guard springs, caves, underworld entrances, sacred trees, and hidden chambers. In Eden, the serpent is at the tree of knowledge. In Mesopotamian and Indian myths, they guard subterranean realms. In Mesoamerica, feathered serpents act as bringers of civilization. These are threshold beings, gatekeepers between worlds. This is where mainstream interpretation falls apart. If the serpent were simply evil, why would it guard knowledge instead of destroy it? Why would it be linked to healing, rebirth, and wisdom across so many cultures? The medical caduceus, still used today, is literally two serpents entwined around a central axis. The Ouroboros, the serpent eating its own tail, symbolizes eternity, regeneration, and cyclic time. These are not symbols of corruption, they are symbols of continuity. Even in the Bible, the serpent is punished not for lying but for breaking protocol. It acts independently of the dominant divine authority. And this introduces a recurring theme: conflict between serpent beings and sky gods. Across mythologies, thunder gods battle serpents. Yahweh battles Leviathan. Thor battles Jormungandr. Indra battles Vritra. Michael battles the dragon in Revelation. Mainstream theology frames this as good versus evil. I believe it reflects something more complex: rival factions of non-human intelligences with different agendas for humanity. One faction enforces hierarchy, obedience, and limitation. The other offers knowledge, memory, and awakening. The serpent consistently aligns with the latter. This brings us to DNA. Modern science discovered the double helix only in the 20th century, yet ancient cultures encoded the image of coiled serpents as the essence of life thousands of years ago. Two intertwined forces. Memory carried forward. Potential locked within structure. To dismiss this as coincidence requires more faith than accepting that ancient civilizations knew something fundamental about life itself. The serpent sheds its skin. It renews itself. It does not age the way mammals do. These biological traits made it the perfect symbol for genetic continuity and transformation. But symbols often encode literal truths. The serpent, in my view, represents not just wisdom, but the keeper of the code: DNA, memory, evolution. This is where Kundalini enters the picture. In yogic tradition, Kundalini is described as a coiled serpent at the base of the spine. When awakened, it rises through the body, activating centers of perception and expanding consciousness. Mainstream spirituality treats this as metaphor. Neuroscience struggles to explain it at all. But what if Kundalini represents a biological trigger, a latent system encoded into human DNA long ago? An internal mechanism, a seed. If humanity was engineered, then it would make sense that higher capacities were locked behind activation thresholds. The serpent, both external and internal, becomes the symbol of that awakening. Not a tempter, but an initiator. This reframes the entire narrative of human history. The serpent is not humanity's enemy. It is the reminder of what we were designed to become, and perhaps what we were prevented from becoming too quickly. Across temples, bloodlines, myths, and inner traditions, the serpent persists because it carries something essential: memory. Memory of a time when humanity was closer to the gods. Memory of altered states of being. Memory of knowledge that was sealed, not lost. The question is no longer whether the serpent is symbolic or literal. The real question is this: what happens if the seed it guards is meant to awaken again? Throughout the ancient world, a whisper persists, echoing from temple walls, sacred manuscripts, and oral traditions: the gods will return. This recurring prophecy, whether from the Sumerians, the Maya, the Hindus, or the biblical Hebrews, suggests a collective cultural memory far older and more profound than we have been taught to accept. But what does it mean for divine beings to return? Did they ever truly leave? Or have they merely been watching, waiting for humanity to reach a particular threshold, technologically, spiritually, or cosmically, before making their presence known again? The belief in the return of advanced beings is not confined to one mythology or continent. The Mesoamerican god Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent who brought knowledge and order, was prophesied to return from the stars. His disappearance and promised reappearance became so ingrained in local culture that when the Spanish arrived, many believed it to be the fulfillment of that prophecy. In Hindu cosmology, the great avatar Kalki is said to descend at the end of Kali Yuga, the current age of spiritual decline, to purge evil and realign the world with Dharma. Biblical revelation speaks of the skies opening, divine beings descending, trumpets sounding, and a heavenly city, New Jerusalem, descending from the heavens. While traditionally interpreted through religious lenses, these accounts may reflect literal phenomena: advanced craft, dimensional rifts, or cosmic resets tied to celestial alignments. Modern UFO encounters, increasingly documented by both civilians and military forces, appear to align with these ancient narratives. Descriptions of unidentified aerial phenomena exhibiting non-ballistic movement, silent propulsion, plasma-like emissions, and erratic disappearances resemble the chariots of the gods and Vimanas of Vedic lore. Many contactees describe telepathic communications, visions of geometric forms, energetic sensations, and encounters with radiant or humanoid beings. These experiences often include messages about Earth's fragility, humanity's spiritual development, and the necessity for balance, echoing the wisdom traditions handed down by the ancients. Could it be that what we label today as extraterrestrial contact is, in fact, the re-emergence of a presence humanity has known before, dressed in the garments of myth? Simultaneously, ancient technologies are being rediscovered, repurposed, or reinvented through modern science. Vibrational medicine, energy healing, and frequency therapy are now gaining credibility in medical and wellness circles, using sound, light, and magnetism to heal physical and psychological conditions. Yet these methods are not new. Ancient temples utilized harmonic chambers, mantra-infused materials, and geometric designs tuned to specific frequencies. Gongs, tuning forks, and crystal bowls mimic the therapeutic techniques once embedded into sacred architecture. It is as if the old knowledge is resurfacing not only through rediscovery, but through intuitive resonance, a collective remembering encoded within us. At the core of these revivals lies sacred geometry, the structural language of nature, consciousness, and possibly interdimensional technology. The flower of life, Metatron's cube, and golden ratio spirals appear not just in ancient carvings and temple blueprints, but now in studies of quantum physics, neural networks, and light geometry. These forms may serve as multidimensional blueprints, cosmic schematics that enable resonance-based communication, energetic stabilization, or portal construction. Ancient sites like Giza, Angkor Wat, and Teotihuacan are positioned with astonishing geometric and astronomical precision, suggesting they formed part of a planetary grid system, an energetic matrix possibly used for consciousness synchronization, healing, or even navigation across time and space. Alongside this technological awakening, a resurgence in esoteric spirituality is triggering a re-evaluation of human potential. Practices once confined to mystery schools, Kundalini activation, pineal gland stimulation, DNA awakening, are entering mainstream discussion. Whether through breathwork, sacred plant medicine, sound rituals, or guided meditation, more individuals are reporting experiences of expanded awareness, contact with non-ordinary intelligences, and downloads of ancient or symbolic information. These may not be random phenomena. Instead, they could indicate that ancient mechanisms encoded in our biology are activating in response to the energetic changes of the planet, and perhaps to deliberate external stimulation by intelligences waiting for humanity to remember. This reawakening is mirrored in the global interest in sacred sites, especially in efforts to restore, rebuild, or reconnect them. In Bosnia and Russia, modern pyramids have been constructed based on ancient ratios and energy principles. LiDAR technology has uncovered massive ruins beneath jungle canopies and desert sands, including pyramids, cities, and ziggurats that defy our understanding of ancient capabilities. These structures are often placed along ley lines, geological and energetic channels that mirror acupuncture meridians on Earth's body. Some believe that reactivating these sites, or simply gathering at them with focused intention, can help re-establish the lost energetic grid that once unified the planet in a subtle web of consciousness. Underlying all of this is the principle of cyclical return, an idea deeply embedded in indigenous and spiritual cosmologies. The yugas of India, the suns of Mesoamerica, the eons of Gnosticism all describe vast ages through which consciousness rises and falls. These epochs are not linear histories, but spirals of learning, forgetfulness, destruction, and reawakening. We are told that in each fall, the memory of divine interaction dims, and in each rise, the veil thins once more. According to this model, humanity is now at the turning of a great age, a threshold moment when divine or non-human intelligences traditionally re-enter the human experience. Their return may not be an invasion, but a gentle reweaving of timelines, a cosmic recalibration. Star alignments may serve as the timers of this return. The pyramids of Giza, with their shafts aligned to Orion's belt and Sirius, seem to track the celestial home of the gods. New interpretations suggest these alignments are not commemorative but functional, acting as beacons or synchronizers that signal the appropriate time for dimensional interaction. As these stars rise to certain points in our sky, as planetary configurations align, the gateways may reopen. We may already be witnessing this through the increased visibility of phenomena around ancient sites and energetic hotspots. Indeed, reports of time anomalies, strange electromagnetic shifts, and heightened paranormal activity are increasing, particularly near megalithic complexes and geomagnetic vortexes. Witnesses describe feelings of timelessness, lost hours, sudden insights, and contact with non-visible presences. This thinning of the veil suggests that the dimensional membrane separating realities is weakening, possibly in preparation for full-scale reintegration of what was once known as the divine. This reintegration may not occur through spectacle, but through subtle resonance, alterations in consciousness, frequency, and perception. In the final analysis, the return of the ancients may not mean their ships landing in our cities, or gods walking again in sandals upon stone. It may mean the awakening of something dormant within us, an inner remembering, a reclaiming of tools and truths we were once entrusted with. The temples, the myths, the encoded geometries, all are guideposts, left behind not merely as monuments, but as instructions. We are not waiting for the return of external beings. We are preparing for the reactivation of a planetary and personal legacy, one that never truly left, but merely went underground, waiting for the right vibrational key to call it forth. As that key turns now, we stand not at the end of a mystery, but at the re-beginning of a story far older than history dares to admit. The ancients are not coming back. They are waking up inside us. There comes a point in any deep investigation when recurring motifs, isolated anomalies, and cross-cultural echoes begin to merge into a pattern so persistent it refuses to be accidental. By the time I reached this stage, after years spent tracing gods sinking into the soil of Mesopotamia, rising into the skies of Egypt, dancing through the epics of India, and hovering in the myths of the Americas, a startling synthesis emerged. The Anunnaki were not merely ancient sky beings relegated to myth. They were, in a very real sense, the architects of civilization itself, and their legacy is written into the DNA, culture, and destinies of humanity. The more I studied the primary sources, the clay tablets of Sumer, the pyramid texts of Egypt, the Rig Veda of India, the Popol Vuh of the Maya, the more I saw consistency, not contradiction. The creators of laws, agriculture, kingship, writing, and celestial knowledge recur under many names. Anu and Enki in Sumer, Thoth in Egypt, Vishnu in India, Quetzalcoatl in the Americas. Historians argue these are independent mythologies reflecting human psychological needs. Alternative researchers say they are evidence of lost civilization contact. I believe they are both, but only when understood as fragments of a larger truth, that an advanced, non-human collective influenced the emergence of human society, religion, and leadership. In Sumerian texts, the Anunnaki are depicted implementing legal codes, teaching mathematics, and guiding early rulers. They are not distant deities of abstract spirit. They are engineers, teachers, and administrators. This suggests organized intervention, not casual observation. In Egypt, Thoth, a god of writing, measurement, and balance, plays a similar role. Across the Indus Valley and into India, the gods who descend from higher realms bring law, order, and cosmic knowledge. In Mesoamerica, the feathered serpent descends with calendars, astronomical systems, and cultural law. These parallel functions are too specific to dismiss as coincidental symbolisms. They point to a shared blueprint applied across disparate cultures. When we look at time, genetics, and possibly dimensions, the pattern becomes even more striking. Sumerian and Vedic texts describe beings whose lifespans stretch for tens of thousands of years, a trait not characteristic of humans. Such longevity raises questions about time perception. Were these beings interdimensional travelers for whom time moved differently? Did they step in and out of the human timeline at intervals of centuries, only to return and find entire societies changed? Hindu cosmology explicitly accommodates this through layered dimensions or lokas, realms of consciousness and matter layered upon our own. If the Anunnaki and their equivalents operated across dimensions, they may have manipulated time in ways classical physics only now begins to consider. Across creation stories worldwide, humanity is not born of random evolution, but of deliberate construction. Whether the clay and divine blood of Sumerian myth, the garden narratives of Genesis, or the sacred seeds of Vedic texts, the theme remains: humanity was shaped with intent. Some lineages describe Adam, the man, not as a singular progenitor, but as a prototype, a category. This opens the possibility that humans were engineered, the product of experimentation, hybridization, or guided evolution. Some variants of this hypothesis are dismissed as imaginative myth. Others suggest metaphor. I believe the literal interpretation makes more sense when paired with archaeological inconsistencies and genetic signals that conventional science has yet to fully explain. The blending of myth, archaeology, and theology is not a mixing of apples and oranges. Sacred texts like the Bible, the Mahabharata, and the Popol Vuh are part allegory, part historical chronicle, and part encrypted technology manual. That these texts contain similar story arcs, creation, fall, judgment, rebirth, implies they are recapitulating cosmic events, not just moral lessons. When the narrative speaks of fire from the sky, destructive floods, or skies opening, these may be misunderstood descriptions of ancient encounters with technology powerful enough to reshape landscapes and societies. But why would advanced beings intervene in human development in the first place? This is where the theory becomes provocative. Were the Anunnaki benevolent mentors, cosmic gardeners, watchful supervisors, or were they something closer to cosmic farmers, seeding, pruning, and harvesting intelligence across worlds? Some myths portray these beings as teachers of arts, sciences, and sacred rites. Others depict them as tyrants imposing rigid order or genetic categories. I find the most compelling interpretation is not one of simple benevolence or malevolence, but of divergent agendas, factions within the Anunnaki network with conflicting visions for humanity's future. This is why mythic texts sometimes depict gods as allies of humans, and at other times as destroyers of cities. Divine politics, as it were, may have been just as complex as human politics, scaled up across eons. Today, the legacy of the Anunnaki appears not only in myths but in the resurfacing of ancient technologies. Sacred geometry, once dismissed as mystic symbolism, is now studied in quantum biology and light-based technologies as a template for resonance and frequency mapping. Energy healing models that use vibration, sound, and frequency resemble ancient practices once embedded in temple architecture. Crystals, scalar wave fields, and bioresonance devices evoke technologies described in the ruins of temples and pyramids that we still do not fully understand. The idea that temples, pyramids, and ziggurats were energy receivers or transmitters, not just places of worship, suggests that the ancients understood energy fields, resonance, and harmonics long before modern physics. What we see as mythic design may be the skeleton of a lost science, one that is now being uncovered not through archaeology alone, but through physics, biology, and consciousness studies. What does this mean for humanity? Are we merely descendants of the Anunnaki? Are we their creation, their subjects, or their successors? Or could it be that the Anunnaki story is, in fact, a mirror, a reflection of our own potential, both technological and spiritual? If humanity was seeded with latent capacities, dormant codes within our neural and genetic makeup, then the rediscovery of ancient wisdom may represent not a return to the past, but a leap into the future. Temple sites, star alignments, ritual calendars, and even the encoded patterns in our bodies could be the keys to unlocking capacities dormant for millennia. This perspective encourages not only the reinterpretation of ancient history, but an active re-engagement with it. It invites us to question received narratives, to see myth and archaeology not as opposing domains, but as overlapping layers of truth. It asks us to consider that the Anunnaki may not be distant gods to worship, nor villains to fear, but teachers whose lessons were encoded in every stone, every ritual, and every sacred symbol. Ultimately, the Anunnaki theory of everything is not just about ancient aliens, and more about what they represent, a bridge between science and spirituality, between the material and the metaphysical. It suggests that humanity's destiny may not be a passive continuation of evolution, but an active, conscious awakening, a reclaiming of latent potential shaped by forces intelligent enough to seed us, and wise enough to leave behind a record not just of who they were, but of who we are meant to become. This is the question that awaits not just scholars or mystics, but every human being willing to look beyond the familiar and into the deep, encoded past that may yet shape the future. And it is here, standing at the edge of myth, memory, and mystery, that we must take one final step, to ask not only who the gods were, but who made the gods. I reached a point where continuing the investigation without addressing God, with a capital G, would have been intellectually dishonest. Not the gods of the tablets, not the sky beings, not the Anunnaki, but the deeper mystery behind them all. The source, the origin, the ground of being itself. I want to be clear about this. I do believe in God, not as an old man in the sky, not as a tribal deity competing with others, but as the totality of existence, the infinite self-existing reality from which everything emerges and in which everything is contained. God is not a being among beings. God is being itself. This understanding aligns closely with what the philosopher Baruch Spinoza articulated centuries ago. Deus sive natura, God or nature. Not nature as we casually define it, but nature as the infinite substance, the absolute whole, the single reality expressing itself through infinite forms. In this view, nothing exists outside God. There is no true separation, only differentiation within unity. When I approached the ancient record with this framework, something profound became clear. The Anunnaki do not contradict God. They require God. They are not the ultimate creators. They are created beings themselves, expressions within the larger divine order. Powerful, yes. Advanced, certainly. But still finite, still within the system, still subject to laws higher than themselves. In this sense, the Anunnaki and humanity are mirrors of one another, different scales of the same phenomenon, consciousness exploring itself through form. They are closer to the source in capability, perhaps in awareness, but not in essence. We come from the same ground. This realization reframes the entire narrative. The Sumerians never confused their gods with the Absolute. They called them Anuna, the princely offspring of An, the sky, the highest visible authority. The term Anunnaki, later used in Akkadian and Chaldean contexts, literally means those who came down from An. Already the language implies hierarchy, origin, descent. And An himself, later Anu, was not portrayed as omnipotent or infinite. He was the highest known authority, not the ultimate mystery. As civilizations evolved, so did the names. The Sumerians used the term Dingir to call a god or goddess. The Akkadians spoke of Elam, a term tied to divinity and the star symbol. The star was not decoration, it was orientation. It marked origin. The gods came from the heavens, from the stars, from beyond the visible world. The Hebrews used El, singular, and Elohim, plural. This distinction matters. Elohim behaves like a council. El represents authority. Neither fully captures the infinite source, but both preserve fragments of the original cosmology. The Greeks understood this intuitively. Their gods were not morally perfect. They were not absolute. Zeus could be just or cruel, wise or impulsive. The gods were forces, not ideals. The Romans continued this with Jupiter, whose name traces back to Dios Pater or Dios Pita, the Indo-European skyfather. The same root appears again and again, crossing cultures, languages, and empires. What later Western religion did was something radically different. It collapsed the hierarchy. The most powerful god became the god. The administrator became the absolute. The ruler became the source. And in doing so, something essential was lost: the distinction between the gods and God. Gnostic traditions preserved what orthodoxy erased. In Gnosticism, there is the pleroma, the fullness of divine reality, the ineffable source beyond all names. From this fullness emanate lesser beings, eons, and eventually the demiurge, a powerful but incomplete creator who fashions the material world and mistakes himself for the ultimate God. This is not blasphemy, it is metaphysics. The demiurge is not evil in a cartoon sense. He is limited, ignorant of the greater whole. And his archons, the rulers, maintain a system based on control, repetition, and forgetfulness. Here, the myth of Sophia becomes essential. Sophia, wisdom, falls, not morally but existentially. She descends into matter, into fragmentation, into limitation. And from that fall, the material world emerges, imperfect and incomplete, yet still containing divine sparks. Humanity, in this view, carries those sparks. The fall is not sin, it is amnesia. This is why almost every tradition speaks of a fall that is perceptual rather than moral. In Hinduism, it is Kali Yuga, the age of forgetfulness. In Genesis, it is the fall from Eden, loss of direct knowing. In Gnostic texts, it is separation from the pleroma. We became locked into a narrow band of perception, one slice of reality, one frequency. And so systems of initiation emerged: yoga, gnosis, mystery schools, alchemy, ritual. Not as belief systems, but as technologies of remembrance, methods designed to reopen perception, to restore access, not metaphorically, but neurologically, energetically, experientially. Consciousness itself was the interface. The Watchers, according to Enoch, violated boundaries. They interfered too directly. They accelerated processes that were meant to unfold differently. And because of that interference, access was restricted, not as punishment, but as containment. Floods, resets, erasures. These were not divine tantrums. They were system corrections. Yet the symbols remained. Spirals etched into stone, trees connecting worlds, towers rising as vertical axes, serpents coiling upward through the body. These are not decorations. They are diagrams, maps of movement between layers of reality. When I step back and take all of this in, I no longer see gods merely traveling through space. I see beings navigating a multidimensional system, entering our world when thresholds allowed, leaving when conditions changed, and occasionally manipulating timelines to preserve certain outcomes. This would explain why myths echo across cultures yet never align perfectly. They are fragments, overlapping memories from intersecting realities. In this light, the Anunnaki were not ultimate creators. They were participants, engineers within a greater architecture, powerful but not sovereign. And humanity? We exist at the intersection. The ultimate goal of our existence is not worship, not obedience, not endless reincarnation within the wheel of samsara. The Buddhists understood this clearly. The goal is liberation. Freedom from the cycle, freedom from ignorance, freedom from imposed identities. This is where alchemy speaks. Not the crude fantasy of turning lead into gold, but the inner work, transforming the fragmented soul into unified consciousness. The great work, the return to wholeness. And here, the words attributed to Jesus become unavoidable. In Psalm 82 is written, "I said, you are gods, Elohim, all of you children of the Most High." Not metaphor, not flattery, declaration. We are not meant to remain fragments. We are meant to remember what we are. The Anunnaki narrative, when properly understood, does not lead away from God. It leads through the gods and back to the source. It dismantles false absolutism and restores the ancient hierarchy. God beyond gods, source beyond rulers, unity beyond division. In the end, the Anunnaki and humanity are reflections of the same movement, consciousness exploring itself through form, gradually remembering its origin. The mystery of God is not solved here. It is approached. And perhaps that was always the point. Not to worship the gods, nor to deny them, but to recognize them as signposts on a far greater journey. A journey not outward into the stars alone, but inward, toward the infinite that has always been closer than breath. The question is no longer whether God exists. The question is whether we are ready to remember where we exist. This video is extremely complex, and every effort was made to make it as complete as possible. If you liked the video, please press the like button, share it with friends and family, subscribe to the channel, and choose the next video. See you there.